Tim joins us now. Tim, great to have you here on the program. Tim Eyman with us.
Hey, I really appreciate you having me on, Joe.
You bet. And, of course, this has been kind of a cruddy year for you. I mean, you've been pushing this for, since the election last November. It passed pretty handily on this statewide initiative, but the Supreme Court unanimously said it's a no-go, that it had too many issues on the ballot was the decision.
Yeah, well, the voters were confused by our initiative, and the reality is, it wasn't a big defeat for me. It's a defeat for voters. Everybody tries to make it about me. The reality is the voters overwhelmingly voted for the initiative for the third time in 21 years. Our first initiative was struck down, but the legislature adopted it anyway. The second time we did the $30 TOPS initiative, it was upheld by the Supreme Court. So we just did the third initiative based on the second initiative because that one had been upheld. And they basically reversed themselves and said, well, this time we're going to say it's too many subjects, even though it has the same stuff in it that the second one did. So it's agonizingly frustrating, I think, for voters to vote overwhelmingly for a measure like this one that's so easy to understand, $30 tabs, and to have 9 Supreme Court justices say that voters were confused, I think pretty much makes everyone's head explode.
But it's pretty clear, though, that a ballot issue has to address one thing, and I would understand if it just said car tabs will be $30. But this also said it had all these other riders saying that these transit districts
that are above $30 have to go away.
Well,
so in order to get $30, you have to do taxes and fees that are above $30, Joe. It's not confusing at all.
Well, but it is in the fact that there were voters in these taxing districts that said, yes, we will pay these extra taxes for mass transit, and those areas voted overwhelmingly against it. And then you had voters in other parts of the country that weren't, or the state rather, that weren't affected by, the traffic that they experienced there in the Seattle area, that you likely experienced there in Snohomish County and parts of Snohomish County. And that.
Well, Joe, try and stay focused.
Well, no,
Taxes and fees that were above $30 were repealed by the initiative. Some of them were approved locally by city councils and stuff like that. But we had to get rid of the taxes and fees above $30 in order to get $30 tabs. The initiative was overwhelmingly passed by voters, and the thing that no one seems to want to acknowledge, the critics of it, is a King County Superior Court judge appointed by Jay Inslee, with absolutely every predilection to find it unconstitutional, upheld the initiative and said it was single subject, and he said there was nothing misleading about the initiative at all. So it could be read that way. It's just that these 9 Supreme Court justices chose to read it in a way to be able to knock it down.
Okay, so one King County judge as opposed to 9 Supreme Court judges looking at this same issue, and I just, it doesn't.
Well, I know it's complicated for you, but the reality is the way judges work. The way judges work is if you can look at a statute and find it constitutional, you have to err on the side of upholding it. This judge proved that it could be read in a way that was all single subject, in a way that makes it where it wasn't misleading. He was able to actually thoroughly examine it. The trial court judge is the one who thoroughly examines it. They're only reviewing his work. This is a King County judge that would love to have struck it down, but he didn't because it was unambiguously legal and constitutional.
Okay, well, I'll grant you that, but there's still the issue of statewide voters can say, yes, we'll do $30 car tabs. And then what's wrong with voters in King County, in a taxing district in that really, I think, in my opinion, cries out for mass transit? And what's wrong with those people saying, okay, $30 car tabs, we'll start there, but we have voted in favor of these taxes to be tacked on to our car tabs to pay for these other projects? What's wrong with that?
Well, Sound Transit went to the voters in 2016 and told them, if you vote for this measure, Sound Transit 3, your car tabs will go up about $80. And what everyone found out was that they lied, and that everyone's car tabs went up $300, $500, $800 higher. And I think it's totally appropriate when the government lies to you in order to be able to get a vote. It's totally appropriate to go back to voters and say, now that you know the truth, now that you know that it's hundreds and many times thousands of dollars more than the government said, let's take another crack at this thing. And it's important to remember that in Snohomish County, the initiative passed with 58% of the vote. Pierce County passed it with 66% of the vote. And non-Seattle King County, the area outside of Seattle, voted 53% in favor of the initiative. There's only one group of people that want high car tabs, and that's Seattle people. And Seattle people, even though they were outvoted by the rest of the state, they ended up getting their way and keeping everybody's car tabs higher, not just them, but for everybody else.
Well, but see, that's the issue that this all hinges on, though. That's what the Supreme Court's decision hinges on, is that this not only reduced the car tabs to $30, but it also vacated all these other taxes that had already been approved by and I've heard
that were above $30, Joe.
Right. But
and you have
now
to get
you
rid
can't
of taxes and fees above $30 in order to get $30 tabs for everybody.
But now, Tim, you can't deny that Sound Transit and transit projects in general have been something that you've wanted to just take apart forever. I mean, that's been one of your goals. It's been one of your publicly stated goals, hasn't it?
And one of the nice parts about the initiative process is that I get one vote, and the other 7 million people in the state get a chance to vote too. And 53% of voters statewide said they want $30 tabs for everybody.
But
now,
why? But okay.
Now, if the legislature wants to come back and give authority back to those local governments to go back to voters and raise car tabs again, the initiative said, if you want to have future voter-approved tax increases, that's fine. You can do that. But this particular vote was a lie. And we think it's very clear that the voters in Pierce, Snohomish, non-Seattle King County all felt misled, and that's why they voted for the initiative. And I think it's a real travesty of justice to when Seattle voters vote against a measure, everybody else votes for it, and Seattle wins the vote. I thought everybody's vote counts the same. It shouldn't be a Seattle voter counting more than somebody who votes outside of Seattle.
But that's not the case. I mean, a Seattle voter is one person, one vote, just like anywhere else. I mean, why would it be fair? Now, well, let me ask you this. Why is it fair that voters in eastern Washington or any other part of Washington should determine the transit projects for the Seattle area, which has very unique in our state, has unique problems. I mean, I don't like to drive into Seattle. I don't know anybody who enjoys driving and sitting in traffic in Seattle and couldn't benefit from mass transit.
And there's no doubt that when you're doing a statewide initiative, you're making statewide policy. And we were trying to do the same policy that voters have voted for 2 times before, which is everybody in the state paying a flat rate $30 to license their vehicle. You can't say it's confusing. The initiative was very clear what the initiative did, what the destination was. The King County judge agreed with it. It is an absolutely unambiguous measure, and you just can't, with a straight face, say, oh, I'm sorry, the voters just didn't know what they were voting on.
Well, I think nine justices of the Supreme Court said that with I'm just saying what the Supreme Court. If I wouldn't be having this, I wouldn't be arguing with this point over with you if the Supreme Court of the state didn't unanimously say that that's not the case. And they didn't say necessarily voters were confused. They said they were.
Fair to say, is it fair to say that liberal initiatives that have multiple topics in them, like 1639, the anti-gun initiative that had 17 things in them, they could find that to be single subject, but our initiative that just says $30 tabs is somehow violative of the single subject rule? That doesn't make any sense.
I'm not a judge on the Supreme Court, so I'm not litigating. I'm not, that hasn't been brought before the court, but, or has it? Maybe it has.
It actually was. And they unanimously allowed it to go on the ballot, even though they printed the petitions wrong, didn't even have the language correct. There's just no doubt in my mind that this initiative was clear, unambiguous. A King County Superior Court judge who was appointed by Jay Inslee, who had every incentive in the world to find that this initiative was unconstitutional, upheld the initiative. These judges have a job. and that's it, to err on the side of upholding a law that is passed either by the voters or by the legislature. It's supposed to be a really extraordinarily high bar to overturn a law that's been passed by the people, and yet these guys ended up coming at it going, we want to strike it down, but we have to get there some way, and the best they could come up with was the voters were confused.
But
why
do you think judges, 9 Supreme Court judges would have that attitude going into it? Why would they be so biased against this specific initiative? I mean, they would like to pay $30.
Taxes, because it reduces taxes and limits the government's power. If our initiative had expanded government's power and raised taxes, there's no doubt in my mind they would have found it to all be single subject and unconfusing. Our initiative, however, reduced taxes and limited the government's power, and the concept of them doing that, the only thing that really kind of gnaws at me is in 2003, they upheld an initiative just like this one that reduced state taxes, local fees, did exactly the same kind of stuff this one was, and they upheld that one on the single subject rule and finding the ballot title to be perfectly fine. It's just clear that the 9 Supreme Court justices today are different than the ones back in 2003. And that's what you shouldn't be doing. You should actually stick with the precedent that you had before.
Well, and precedent is important. I agree. But the bottom line is that I have a hard time believing that 9 Supreme Court justices are that power mad that they want to. It's just this idea.
Are you new to Washington, Joe?
No, heck no.
You've been here a long time.
I've been here for going on 20 years, and now well, let me just ask you real quick, Tim. And we're talking with Tim Eyman.
How many liberal initiatives have you seen struck down by the Supreme Court?
Right offhand, I couldn't tell you. And I don't know how many liberal initiatives, quote unquote, there have been, but I don't keep a tally. None. None
is the answer to your question. So only the conservative ones are. And the reality is I've dedicated my life to drafting ballot measures. I work really hard at it. I can follow the rules. And when they lay down the rules, I'll follow them. But when they change the rules 17 years later without giving you any notice, it gets a bit tough.
Can I throw a conspiracy theory that I've heard at you?
I know exactly where you're going, so go ahead.
You do? Okay. That you purposely put these little legal clinkers in your in your initiative, so knowing that they'll ultimately fail in the judicial system, and then it's back to the drawing board, and the Tim Eyman machine keeps going.
Karen and I ended up selling off our retirement fund, and we loaned $500,000 to kickstart the signature drive for the initiative. That was my level of commitment. That was my level of confidence that I was following the rules, that I was doing exactly what they did back in 2003. I had more skin in the game of anybody. And if I had any doubt whatsoever that this thing wasn't going to go my way, would I have really put my own money on the table in order to be able to do that? It doesn't make any sense. A King County judge upheld it. A Supreme Court in 2003 upheld an initiative just like this one. I can follow rules, except when the rules change in the process. Doesn't mean you quit. You just have to acknowledge the fact that if you're doing a liberal initiative, all bets are off, anything goes. You do a conservative initiative, you have to do it 3 times, 4 times, 5 times in order to get the same thing. It's brutal. I mean, it's a very, very difficult process in a state like Washington. But the reality is we've gotten 17 initiatives on the ballot. Voters have approved 11 of them, and they've saved taxpayers about $43 billion in the last 20 years, according to the state budget office. So, the reality is we've had tremendous success, but it's not like it's a linear game where just because the voters vote for it doesn't mean the establishment's just going to accept it. They're going to fight it every step of the way.
Okay, real quick. You sounded like on the day this decision came down, you're not gonna give up on this issue. Will you come back with I don't know if cleaner is a right way to put it, but maybe something that doesn't involve mass transit, just $30 car tabs?
This one was $30 car tabs for the fourth or fifth time. There's no doubt that I've been on this tug of war, and the voters have been on this tug of war for 22 years. They voted 3 times to get their car tabs lower. They're dramatically lower today than they ever were 20 years ago, so we are making progress. So I'm more than happy to do a fourth initiative, but the reality is, should it take 4 times for the voters to vote for it before elected officials will listen? Senator Jug Erickson and a lot of the good legislators are willing to implement this thing the same way Governor Gary Locke did 21 years ago. It's just that Jay Inslee is no Gary Locke, and he's not the kind of guy that's going to let a little thing like voters wanting something step in the way of him getting what he wants, which is a hell of a lot more money than he's really entitled to, because the voters clearly don't want to be paying these taxes and fees, and for them to just keep them seems like the height of arrogance to me.
All right, Tim. Well, I appreciate you joining us today and sharing with us, and we'll see where things go from here, I guess.
Hey, I really appreciate the vigorous debate. It's a lot of fun, and it's all good spirited stuff. So I appreciate your time, sir.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, man.
You bet. Tim Eyman with us, of course, the initiative sponsor, and we'll see what happens. Likely he'll be back, and we'll be back in just a moment.